Hello, everybody. Christina Previtt here. I'm one of the lead faculties for the older adult division of PT on Ice. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful, wonderful week. For our clinicians who are doing the CrossFit Open, I hope that the workouts are forever in your favor. I've been loving watching some of the commentary on the CrossFit stuff and some of the fitness athlete division looking at ways to scale and all that kind of stuff with the CrossFit Open going on. So I hope you guys are having an awesome, awesome week. Just so you guys know, this is the last week to sign up for the second cohort of the Modern Management of the Older Adult course. So if you guys are hesitating, please sign up. We have some great feedback from our first cohort that we're going to be bringing into our second cohort, and it's going to be awesome. And if you know me, I kind of sing and dance on camera all the time. I can't help it. Okay, so for today, I thought that I would talk a little bit about incontinence with some of our older clients. It's a really, really big issue. And when I first started treating older adults, I kind of saw pelvic floor physiotherapy as this separate entity. And because I wasn't trained in pelvic floor, I wasn't treating pelvic floor, I mistakenly didn't mention it and didn't talk about pelvic floor issues as often as I should. And as I've developed as a clinician and I've started treating more older clients and these conversations have come up, I've realized just how important it is with a lot of our clients, but particularly with our older adults, to be talking about issues of incontinence and how they can affect some of our physiotherapy outcomes from a physical perspective, and then how it can affect the other domains like social integration, mental health, and emotional health for some of our older clients. And so I want to quickly go into some of the different types of incontinence and where we tend to see more issues with some of our older clients, and then talk about the why. The why I'm not a pelvic floor physiotherapist. I have a referral network for who I refer to if some of my older clients are complaining about pelvic floor issues. So who to refer to and why we're doing that, things like that. That's kind of the idea for today. So we know when we're talking about incontinence that we're always talking about, if we're thinking about urinary incontinence, bowel incontinence, or some mixture of the two. And so when we're talking about stress incontinence, it's accidental spurts of urine, often when there's an increase in intra-abdominal pressure. So that's when we're having coughing, sneezing, any sort of high impact sports. And so often we think about that after pregnancy, which is more frequent after pregnancy, that we're going to have issues of incontinence that need to be treated. But often some of my older clients will say, well, I've been peeing myself for years. I had a baby, and I ask how old their baby is, and their baby's like 35, 40 years old. So they've been dealing with some of these symptoms of incontinence for a really long time. And because this is such a common issue with women and with men as we get older, and we'll talk a little bit about that, it's something that's almost been normalized. And so having these conversations and saying, there is something that you can do to improve these symptoms, even though your child is 35, 40 years old, can be really empowering and can be a really strong educational point for some of our older clients. Okay, so urge incontinence is the second type of urinary incontinence, which is a sudden urge to urinate and a rapid loss of urine before reaching the bathroom. So all of a sudden you're like, I need to go to the bathroom. I need to go to the bathroom right now. And if you don't reach the bathroom as soon as that urge comes on, you end up leaking urine and having urination without reaching the bathroom. The third kind of thing we see very commonly in incontinence is pelvic organ prolapse, which is a loss of support. I'm obviously using notes with this because I'm not a pelvic floor physiotherapist, but it was really interesting learning all about this, but in school and with some of my clients. So a loss of support of the pelvic organs resulting in herniation into the vaginal channel. The risk of pelvic organ prolapse can increase with traumatic pelvic trauma, but it also increases with age and can be more likely to happen in postmenopausal women because estrogen can be protective for tensile strength of the contractile tissue around the pelvic floor. And so a lot of women post-menopause can have some of these issues with pelvic organ prolapse, and pelvic floor physiotherapy can really help with that. Okay, so so those are kind of the three that we see in terms of urinary incontinence, and then we have bowel incontinence as well, where it's a lack of control or ability to sense rectal fullness and can lead to accidents. Okay, so the reason why I like talking about this with some of my older clients is because not only of some of the physical issues, but because of some of the psychosocial issues. So it has huge health implications. So, and the prevalence of incontinence goes up as we get older. So there was a study that was published in 1999 of community dwelling older adults in the US over the age of 50 that showed that almost half of women were experiencing some sort of urinary incontinence. Over 15% of women, postmenopausal women over the age of 50, experienced fecal incontinence, and over 9% had both. Some other statistics were that 30 to 40% of people over the age of 65 have some issue with pelvic floor, whether it be urinary or bowel incontinence. 60 to 70% of older adults that are in long-term care facilities have some sort of urinary incontinence. So for my geriatric physical therapists who are working in long-term care or SNF settings, this is something that the vast majority of your clients are going to be experiencing. And so having the knowledge and skills to talk and work with the multidisciplinary team around managing these symptoms is going to be really important. In previous PT-on-ACE, we've talked about clinical geriatric syndromes like frailty and sarcopenia. A reminder that a clinical geriatric syndrome is a condition that arises from a constellation of signs and symptoms across multiple organ systems. Incontinence is considered a clinical geriatric syndrome. So what we know about that is when we're thinking about incontinence, that it's not just one issue. It's not just that the bladder is malfunctioning in some way. We think with the pelvic floor, that's the neuromuscular system. We have less neuromuscular control to the pelvic floor as we get older. The efficiency of that system goes down with age, but that doesn't mean that we can't improve it. Just like with sarcopenia, which is clinical muscular weakness, just because that tends to decrease with age doesn't mean that we can't mitigate the symptoms and consequences of that syndrome. The exact same thing is true with incontinence. And so we want to make sure that we are addressing this with our older clients. So the other thing about why this is important, even if we're not kind of specializing in pelvic floor, to talk about with our older clients is that there is a 2-time increased risk of impairment with ADLs and IADLs, and it's associated with frailty. So if people are having issues with incontinence, they are more likely to have issues with self-care. They're more likely to have issues with being able to go out into the community, and that could impair their ability to stay independent in their home. And what we're starting to see is that loss of bowel or bladder control is one of the contributing factors in the decision tree for persons being placed from community dwelling into institutionalized settings. And physical therapists are very, very vital in regards to that transition and trying to mitigate that transition, whether you're working in primary care, if you're in private practice, especially like our home health PTs. You guys are so, so important for helping with this, and therefore making sure that we're addressing issues of incontinence and making the proper referrals are really, really important. What I tend to see in some of my clients, especially my older clients, is that they don't recognize how important physical therapy can be in terms of improving the symptoms of incontinence. They tend to go to their physician and then they're on medications related to urinary retention when it's really a muscular pelvic floor issue rather than a bladder issue. And so getting a well-trained pelvic floor physical therapist that is going to be able to differentiate between those is going to be a really great addition. The other thing around incontinence is that it's a risk factor for falls, because if we are having issues with urinary incontinence and we're having to go to the bathroom frequently, frequent urination, people are getting up in the middle of the night, they're having troubles with seeing, they can have a fall, they can end up in hospital, and we can have that soliloquy of negative health outcomes in relation to falls. So for all of these reasons, making sure that we're addressing some of these concerns with our older clients is going to be really important. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was some of the psychosocial issues with incontinence, and why it can be a really hard conversation as a physical therapist to have with your clients. I was looking at some of the research over the last couple of days, and it was really, really fascinating to see not only some of the physical manifestations of incontinence in our older clients, but how it really trickles downstream into other areas of their life. There was a study that was done in, I think it was 2008. It was a review called the Psychosocial and Societal Burden of Incontinence in an Aged Population. And I can put the citation below. Miranda Farage was the primary author. It was out of the US. And they were talking about some of the mental health and emotional issues that accompany the prevalence of incontinence in an older population. And they were saying that because like 44% of women in this study had urge incontinence, so a sudden feeling of having to go to the bathroom, and if they don't reach the bathroom, then they will urinate. And these women tended to have a heightened risk of depression, a heightened risk of anxiety, especially in social settings, and it's led to feelings of social isolation and loneliness. And if you've been in the kind of geriatric PT world for long periods of time, we recognize that social isolation is a really big issue, especially with our older clients, and it can lead to adverse health outcomes. So we're starting to see these bi-directional arrows in regards to physical function, urinary incontinence and bowel incontinence symptoms, and some of the mental health considerations that we're seeing more prevalently in older clients. And these all interact with each other. So if we're only hitting one target, so if we're only talking about the physical side, we may be really missing out on the why that people are not going out into the community. So we may think as physical therapists, okay, well, they're having trouble with their 6-minute walk test. Their timed up and go is rather slow. Let's improve those symptoms, and then they'll be more likely to come out in the community. When the real reason why they're not going out in the community is because they feel like they can't walk very long before they have to pee. And so really kind of deep diving into some of those reasons and some of those whys, maybe not on the initial assessment, but as you start to develop therapeutic and alliance and rapport with your clients, is going to be really important. So other negative mental health issues that can come up with incontinence is a loss of self-esteem, a loss of sexual libido, and feelings of shame. And so if we're having people that we're seeing who are staying in their home and are experiencing a lot of these negative mental health states because of their incontinence, making sure that we make the proper referral so that we are treating those symptoms as best we can, and not assuming that just because they're X age that there can't be any improvement in symptoms is going to be really, really important. And I know that talking about incontinence with an older client can be very awkward and can feel kind of embarrassing for some clients, for some clinicians. I know that when I first started talking about this, I felt really kind of uncomfortable, and I didn't know if they would think that I was really going outside of my scope asking about these things. But I think that it's really important, and this embarrassment around these conversations actually led the World Health Organization to call incontinence the last medical taboo. And I thought that was really interesting because, you know, like those are some of the things that we just don't talk about. And incontinence has huge healthcare spending implications, with the Agency for Healthcare Policy and Research saying that it costs the US $16.4 billion per year in incontinence-related care, and we're spending $1.1 billion per year on disposable continence products. That to me was huge, and so I took the hashtag pants not pads, that's not mine. That's Sean Hagee and Sarah Haig's hashtag. So I'm totally plugging some of the work that they have been doing with pelvic floor physiotherapy, and I'll put more of the links in the comments below. But I think that this is a very important conversation to be having, something that we need to be, at least from a baseline perspective, knowing kind of what the issues with pelvic incontinence are in our older clients, kind of recognizing that it's not just the urination issue, that it permeates into physical health, it permeates into risk for institutionalization and falls, goes into some of the mental health issues, goes into some of the connectivity and social integration issues, and that it's a very important part to be screening for and asking questions about with some of our older clients. And then, providing that education that this isn't something that cannot be treated. It's something that because of age, we have decreases in neural control to the muscles of the pelvic floor, and we have some weakness in the pelvic floor musculature, but that doesn't mean that we can't mitigate some of those negative health consequences by making the appropriate referrals. And so, pants, not pads is the hashtag and I'm going to put all the links in the bottom, but this was a huge learning experience for me. So I hope that this podcast was helpful, because I'm learning about not only just the symptoms of incontinence, but also where some of these issues of incontinence can also creep up into other aspects of their life was a very important learning experience for me as a new clinician, and one that I am constantly working on improving in terms of my comfort level and my referral network and some of my education that I can provide for my clients. All right, so that is it for today. I hope you guys found that helpful. If you guys have any experiences or stories, place them into the comments below. We would love to hear from you. I'm going to put some of those links to the studies around the psychosocial burden of incontinence and some of Sarah Haig's work in the bottom. If you haven't signed up for the Modern Management of the Older Adult course, you should do that, because it's going to be super fun and exciting. We start next week. Other than that, have a very happy Wednesday. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.